Picture this, a gymnasium in Oakland, California. The year is 1967. The air smells of chalk dust and old leather and something else, something electric. The way the atmosphere charges before a lightning strike. Every man in that room has gone still. Not the kind of still that happens when someone walks in late. Not the polite quiet of a crowd waiting for a show to start. This is the stillness of disbelief. Of 211 people simultaneously holding their breath, because what they are watching cannot be happening, cannot be real, cannot be explained by anything they know about physics, about bodies, about what a human being weighing 137 pounds is capable of doing to a man nearly 3 times his size. A figure stands in the center of the floor. He is unremarkable by every measure that a crowd uses to judge a fighter. Average height, 5 feet 7 inches. Lean to the point of appearing thin in his gray slacks and white collared shirt. No GI, no wraps, no mouthguard. His hands hang loose at his sides, the fingers slightly curled, the knuckles pale and scarred in a way that the overhead fluorescents catch just so. Across from him, breathing hard through his nose, a man named Roy Hollis tries to understand what just happened to him. Roy Hollis, 41 professional bouts, 38 wins, 26 by knockout. The reigning Pacific Coast heavyweight wrestling and grappling champion. 411 pounds of trained, conditioned, decorated athletic mass. And he cannot stand up straight. His left knee has buckled. His right hand is shaking. And somewhere in the front row, a young student named Dennis Wong is writing down every second of what he just witnessed in a pocket notebook, pressing so hard that the pen tears through the paper. This is that story. Oakland, California. March 14th, 1967. A Tuesday evening, 7:43 p.m. The building is called the East Bay Athletic Club, a 2-story converted warehouse on San Pablo Avenue that smells permanently of rubber mats and eucalyptus oil. The main floor runs 60 feet by 40 feet, lit by rows of industrial fluorescents that buzz at a frequency just below conscious notice, the kind of sound that gets into your skull without announcing itself. The kind that makes men restless without knowing why. Along 3 walls, hand-built bleachers hold 211 people. Mostly men, mostly young, mostly there because word had spread the week before through the Oakland martial arts and wrestling community about a challenge demonstration, an open sparring event where styles would be tested against each other. Roy Hollis had been the one to organize it. You need to understand who Roy Hollis was, because if you don't, none of what happens next makes any sense. Roy Hollis was not a bully. Roy Hollis was not a braggart or a fraud or a man who preyed on the weak. He was, by every legitimate athletic measure available in 1967, one of the most formidable physical specimens in Northern California. The numbers: 6 feet 4 inches tall, 411 pounds, 32 years old, at the absolute peak of his athletic conditioning. 14 years of competitive wrestling, beginning in high school in Sacramento, where he went undefeated for 3 consecutive seasons. 8 years of formal judo training under Sensei Kenji Matsumura at the San Francisco Judo Institute, earning his 3rd-degree black belt at age 26, an achievement that typically took a decade to reach. 41 professional bouts in submission wrestling and mixed grappling competitions across California, Nevada, and Oregon. 38 wins. 26 of those victories came by submission or knockout in under 3 rounds. He had never been submitted. He had never been knocked out. In the 3 fights, he did not win. 2 were split decision draws against men who outweighed him by 40 pounds, and 1 was a no contest after a ring structural failure in Portland in 1964 that sent both fighters through the canvas. Hollis ran the East Bay Athletic Club himself. He had founded it 6 years earlier with savings from his work as a longshoreman, and he had built it into something genuinely respected. A place where fighters from different disciplines trained alongside each other with mutual seriousness. He was, by the accounts of his own students and the accounts of men who opposed him, a fair and methodical competitor. He respected skill. He sought it out. But Roy Hollis had a belief, a confident good faith, entirely sincere belief, that he had stress-tested against every challenger for 14 years, and that belief was this: size and strength, properly channeled through correct technique, could neutralize speed and leverage every single time. That weight was the great equalizer. that a man of his dimensions, trained as he was, could absorb whatever any fighter under 200 pounds might generate and simply overwhelm it. He had tested this thesis. It had held. Every time. Against strikers, against judoka, against boxers, against the emerging practitioners of what some people in California were starting to call kung fu. He had choked them all out. He had taken their fastest shots, absorbed them the way a hillside absorbs rain, and then applied the slow, merciless geometry of leverage until they tapped. He had an expression he used with his students. He used it often, without arrogance, simply as a statement of what he believed to be mechanical fact. He would say, mass times velocity times time. A big man with good technique always has more of all three. That Tuesday evening, Roy Hollis had set up his challenge demonstration expecting to prove this thesis again. He had sent invitations to 6 martial arts schools in the Oakland and Berkeley area. He was expecting strikers, maybe some judoka, possibly some of the local boxers. He had told his students that evening was about learning, about finding the edges of systems by putting them under pressure. He did not know that one of the invitations had reached a small school on Broadway Avenue, whose instructor was known by a relatively small community of martial arts practitioners in 1967, though that community's knowledge was quietly, rapidly spreading. A 26-year-old instructor with a background in Wing Chun Kung Fu, who had developed his own evolving fighting philosophy. A man who, in civilian clothes and at a glance, could walk into a room of 400 fighters and disappear entirely. At 7:43 p.m. on a Tuesday in March, Roy Hollis stood at the center of his gymnasium, surveying the crowd of 211 people. He was wearing a white wrestling singlet. He was smiling. He was entirely at ease. He looked like a man who knew exactly how the evening would go. He had no idea. Bruce Lee had not been invited directly. One of his students, a 22-year-old named James Yim Lee, no relation, a former ironworker and amateur boxer who had been training with Bruce for just over a year, had received the flyer through a contact at a Berkeley boxing gym. James had brought it to Bruce on a Sunday morning, sliding it across the work table at the school on Broadway Avenue with a raised eyebrow, not quite suggesting anything, just presenting it. Bruce had looked at it for perhaps 10 seconds, then set it down and gone back to what he was doing. But he had folded it and put it in his shirt pocket. He arrived at the East Bay Athletic Club at 7:31 p.m., 12 minutes before the demonstrations were scheduled to begin, with James Yim Lee and 2 other students from the school. He was wearing gray slacks, a white cotton dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, and plain black shoes. His hair was combed. He looked like a man who had stopped in on his way somewhere else, a dinner, maybe, or a lecture. He was 26 years old, 5 feet 7 inches tall, and weighed 137 pounds. He found a seat in the bleachers in the second row from the top, near the aisle, and sat down. He watched. This is worth staying on for a moment, the watching, because the watching was not passive. Bruce Lee's habit when entering a room of fighters was to spend the first several minutes in complete stillness, absorbing. His students described it later as something qualitatively different from paying attention. He was not cataloging moves or estimating records. He was reading posture, reading how men held tension in their shoulders, reading the micro-adjustments fighters made when they shifted their weight, reading the stories that bodies tell about years of training before a single technique is ever deployed. He could look at a man standing still from 60 feet away and identify his primary style, his dominant side, and the 2 or 3 habits that would come out under pressure. What he saw in Roy Hollis across that gymnasium floor was a man of extraordinary physical capability and genuine technical mastery. He watched Hollis for 4 minutes before anything happened. He watched the way Hollis stood, hips low, weight forward, the natural stance of a man whose game began on the ground. He watched the way Hollis's left hand sat against his thigh when he was relaxed, the subtle rotation in the forearm that marked thousands of hours of grip training. He watched the neck, thick as a tire iron, and calculated the implications for any technique that targeted the head. Then James Yim Lee, sitting beside him, leaned over and quietly said, "That's the man who organized this." And here is where it changes. Bruce Lee did not respond. He did not visibly react. But the man sitting on James's other side, another student, A former amateur wrestler named Gary Dill, who had been watching Bruce watch Hollis, said he saw something shift. Not tension, not aggression, something quieter and more deliberate than either. He described it afterward as like watching someone put down a book they'd been reading and pick up a different one. The same pair of eyes, but reading something completely new. In the bleachers to Bruce's right, 6 rows down, a man named Thomas Kwok, a Wing Chun practitioner from San Francisco who had trained briefly under Ip Man in Hong Kong before immigrating, turned a look at the slim figure in the gray slacks and did a slow double take. He had seen this man before. He knew who this was. Thomas Kwok said nothing. He turned back to face the floor. His expression, witnesses said, shifted from mild interest to something considerably more alert. The demonstrations were about to begin. The evening's format was straightforward. Practitioners from different schools would step forward in sequence, demonstrate their style with a partner, and then Hollis would offer to spar with them using agreed rules. The rules were simple: no strikes to the face, submissions allowed, victory by tap, choke, or the referee's judgment that a fighter could not continue. Hollis had emphasized that the evening was educational rather than competitive. He was generous in how he framed it. He always was. 3 schools went first: a young judoka from Berkeley, a kickboxer from San Leandro, a jiu-jitsu practitioner from San Jose. The results were not dramatic. Hollis dominated the judoka in 45 seconds via a hip throw into a shoulder lock, spent 3 minutes with the kickboxer before a clinch turned the fight to grappling, and the young man tapped to a rear naked choke, and the jiu-jitsu practitioner surprised the crowd by lasting 6 minutes and nearly achieving a guillotine before Hollis's weight advantage neutralized the technique. At approximately 8:17 p.m., a break was called. Fighters and spectators drifted around the floor. Water was passed through the bleachers. Hollis stood near the center of the room, talking with 2 of his senior students, relaxed and satisfied with how the evening was going. It was then that one of those students, a man named Dale Connors, Hollis's most experienced grappler, a former college wrestler who had trained with him for 7 years, leaned in and spoke quietly. Dale Connors had been watching the bleachers all evening. He had noticed, about 40 minutes in, the slim figure in the gray slacks. He had noticed the particular quality of that watching, and he had remembered something. "Roy," Dale said, "you see the man up there in the white shirt? 2nd row, right side aisle." Hollis looked. He saw a young Asian man, slight, unremarkable, sitting with 3 others and speaking quietly. "That's Bruce Lee," Dale said. Hollis looked again. He had heard the name. In 1967, in California martial arts circles, the name had begun to circulate. Not yet a household name, not yet the cultural figure he would become, but already a whisper of something extraordinary. A young instructor in Oakland, a practitioner of something he was calling Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist, a synthesis he was building from Wing Chun, boxing, fencing, and half a dozen other systems. Known for speed demonstrations at karate tournaments, known for a 1-inch punch that had been demonstrated in Long Beach in 1964, and that nobody who had been there seemed able to stop talking about. Hollis studied the slight figure for a long moment. 137 pounds, gray slacks, white shirt. He made a calculation. The calculation was wrong, but it was a reasonable calculation for a man who had spent 14 years confirming the same hypothesis. He crossed the floor. He did not walk over with menace. He walked over with genuine curiosity and the particular confidence of a man who has been the biggest, strongest, most decorated person in every room he has entered for a decade and a half. He stood at the base of the bleachers and looked up at Bruce Lee. "I've heard of you," Hollis said. His voice was calm, conversational. "Would you want to show us something?" The invitation was open, polite. Bruce said nothing immediately. He looked at Hollis for a moment, and people in the bleachers around him said it was the same look he had been using all evening on everyone, that flat, reading attention that cataloged rather than reacted. Then Dale Connors said something else, and this is the moment that witnesses disagree about in the details, but agree on in the shape. Connors said, "He's a small one, Roy. You might have to tie one hand behind your back." The crowd heard it. The crowd registered it. Laughter began in the back corner, not mean, reflexive. The kind of nervous laughter that happens when someone says something that is both a joke and not a joke. 40 or 50 people in a room of over 200 laughing at a man's size before he had done anything. Bruce Lee looked at Dale Connors for 2 seconds. Then he looked back at Hollis. Full contact. Bruce said, "Your rules." The laughter stopped. James Yim Lee reached over and touched Bruce's arm. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. Bruce didn't look at him. He was already climbing down from the bleachers. The referee, a man named Gerald Oakes who refereed grappling competitions across the Bay Area, stepped to the center of the mat and looked between the two men. He knew Roy Hollis very well. He did not know Bruce Lee. He looked at the disparity in their sizes, 411 pounds versus 137 pounds, and he started to raise a hand to call the match off. Bruce Lee looked at Gerald Oakes. Just looked at him. Oakes slowly lowered his hand. 211 people in those bleachers leaned forward. Here is what happened, second by second, as documented by Dennis Wong's pocket notebook, corroborated by the accounts of 9 other witnesses, and described in detail by Roy Hollis himself in an interview given to martial arts historian Ted Wong in 1974. In the first second, Gerald Oakes stepped back, and the match began. Roy Hollis moved immediately, and he moved well. This is essential to understand. His opening movement was not a lunge or a rush or the kind of charging aggression that large fighters sometimes use as a shortcut. He came forward in a controlled drop step, weight distributed, hands forward in a practiced grip fighting position, his center of gravity already low. This was a man with 8 years of judo and 14 years of wrestling. He understood distance, timing, and angle. He was not rushing. He was hunting. In the second, Bruce Lee didn't retreat. He moved sideways, not a large sidestep, perhaps 6 inches of angular displacement, and Hollis's outstretched right hand found nothing. But something else happened simultaneously, something that Dennis Wong's notes describe as a snap, like a towel, and that multiple witnesses in the front row reported hearing as a sharp percussive crack. Bruce Lee's right hand had made contact with the inside of Hollis's reaching forearm. A strike. A specific strike. Wing Chun practitioners would recognize it as a pak saw, a slapping block, but executed with the kinetic velocity of a jab and the structural precision of a lever. The target was the radial nerve cluster, 4 inches below the elbow on the inside of the arm. Hollis's right hand went briefly numb. He did not stop. He adjusted. He had been hit before, harder, and he brought his left arm forward now, going for the body, going for the clinch that was the natural second move in his system, the move that had ended 41 professional bouts. At his size, getting his arms around an opponent was the beginning of the end for that opponent. Always. In the third second, Bruce Lee was no longer where he had been. The footwork was not large. Again, this is critical because the instinct when watching a smaller fighter against a larger one is to expect gymnastic evasion, wide circular movement, distance management. What Bruce Lee used was the opposite. He moved into the center line, directly toward Hollis's body, at a slight angle, and into the space Hollis's left arm was moving through rather than away from it. Later, Bruce would describe this principle in his own notes as the way water finds the lowest point, not by pushing against stone, but by finding the space stone leaves. In Jeet Kune Do terminology, this was centerline theory applied to grappling. By moving into the attack's line of origin rather than away from its point of contact, the smaller fighter denies the larger fighter the leverage they need to complete the technique. Hollis's left arm found Bruce's shoulder, but found it at an angle that provided no purchase, no hook, no hold. In the fourth second, 3 things happened so quickly that Dennis Wong's notes record them in sequence, but several witnesses described them as simultaneous. Bruce Lee's left hand made contact with Hollis's left bicep at the insertion point near the shoulder. Bruce's right hand contacted Hollis's right shoulder at the trapezius, and Bruce Lee stepped his right foot between Hollis's feet, a specific footwork placement that any judo practitioner would recognize as the setup for a major inner reap throw, but executed with a geometric precision that placed Bruce's center of gravity 2 inches lower than Hollis's, which at their size differential was an engineering achievement that defied immediate explanation. Hollis knew what was happening. He felt it. He tried to respond. He dropped his own weight, widened his base, did exactly what his training told him to do when a throw was being set up. He did it well, under normal circumstances, against a man his own weight or even 50 pounds lighter. That response would have been sufficient. In the 5th second, Bruce Lee did not complete the throw. He stopped, not because he couldn't. Witness accounts are consistent on this. The position was set. The geometry was correct. The kazushi, the breaking of Hollis's balance, had been achieved. Hollis himself confirmed in the 1974 interview, "My balance was gone. I was already falling. I just hadn't arrived at the floor yet." Bruce Lee released him. He stepped back. Both hands returned to his sides, and the crowd went completely silent. That silence lasted 4.5 seconds. Not shuffling, not whispering, not the polite quiet of an audience watching something they don't understand. This was the silence of a room in which 211 people had just seen something that did not fit any category they owned for what human bodies could do to each other. Here is the number: 5 seconds. From the moment Gerald Oakes stepped back until the moment Bruce Lee released Roy Hollis, 5 seconds had elapsed. In 5 seconds, against a 411-pound decorated champion, Bruce Lee had landed 2 precision nerve strikes, denied a clinch by moving into rather than away from it, achieved a throw position against a man nearly 3 times his weight, established full mechanical control over the outcome of the engagement, and then chosen not to finish it. That's not a fighting demonstration. That's a philosophy made physical. But the moment wasn't over. Roy Hollis straightened up. His right hand was still tingling from the pack saw. His balance had returned, but something else, a different kind of stability, the kind that comes from certainty, from knowing where you stand in a room, that was still finding its footing. He looked at Bruce Lee. He tried again. This second exchange lasted 8 seconds and covered slightly different terrain. Hollis opened wider, trying to use his wingspan advantage to prevent the angular entry Bruce had used before, pushing forward in a straight line, minimizing the angles available. It was an intelligent adjustment. It was the right adjustment. Bruce went lower, changed his angle, and when Hollis's right arm came for the grip, the thing that happened to the inside of that elbow, witnesses variously described it as a pressure, a lock, a nerve point technique, caused Hollis's arm to stop, not from pain, from something neural, from an interruption in the signal between the intention and the execution. Hollis's knee buckled, left knee, slightly inward. He caught himself. He did not fall, but his leg shook. He looked down at his leg, then up at Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee was already stepping back. The silence that followed this second exchange lasted 7 seconds. A different silence from the first. That one had been the silence of disbelief. This one was the silence of understanding beginning to arrive, of 211 people simultaneously revising every assumption they had carried into the room with them. Dennis Wong's notebook, page 4, upper margin, outside the formal notes, a single underlined question. What was that? Afterward, 15 minutes after the match, after the crowd had begun talking again and the gym had returned to something like its normal register of noise and movement, Roy Hollis found Bruce Lee near the east wall of the gym, standing alone, watching 2 young wrestlers drill a double-leg takedown in the corner. Hollis stood beside him for a moment. He was a man who chose his words carefully. His students described him as someone who thought longer before speaking than almost anyone they'd known. "I need to understand what you did," Hollis said. Bruce didn't look at him immediately. He watched the wrestlers for another moment. "Which part?" "The arm. The first time. My hand went. I didn't have my hand." "Radial nerve. Pak Saw. Wing Chun." Bruce glanced at him then. "But that's just the address. The idea is different." Hollis waited. "You've spent 14 years learning how to use your size," Bruce said, "which means you've also spent 14 years teaching your opponent how to fight your size. I'm not fighting you. I'm fighting the space your size leaves open." Hollis was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the wrestlers in the corner. He looked at Bruce. He said, "I don't know if I can teach that." "You can't teach it," Bruce said. "You can only stop teaching the opposite." This is what Roy Hollis would quote, verbatim, for the rest of his life. In interviews, in his own teaching, in the book he eventually wrote on grappling philosophy in 1981, this sentence appears, attributed always, Precisely. To this evening. You can't teach it. You can only stop teaching the opposite. They talked for 40 minutes. Hollis asked questions and Bruce answered them, not in the language of technique, not this arm position or this footwork, but in the language of principle. He talked about the center line, about economy of motion, about the difference between a system and a truth, the way a map describes territory without being the territory, the way every style he had encountered was a finger pointing at the moon rather than the moon itself. He talked about water, about how water shapes itself to whatever container holds it without losing its essential nature, how the strongest thing in nature is the substance with no fixed form, how that formlessness was not weakness, but the deepest kind of structural intelligence. Hollis listened, the expression on his face, by the accounts of Dale Connors and 2 other students who observed from a respectful distance, was not the expression of a man being corrected. It was the expression of a man seeing something he had been close to for years suddenly brought into focus. At the end of their conversation, Roy Hollis extended his hand. Not a handshake of conclusion. They were already past that, but something more specific. He opened his hand, palm up, and placed it flat against the back of Bruce Lee's left hand. It was, in the tradition of several Asian martial arts, a gesture of acknowledgement from teacher to student. Roy Hollis made that gesture toward Bruce Lee. 23 witnesses saw it. Years later, 4 years later, in 1971, Roy Hollis would fundamentally restructure the curriculum at the East Bay Athletic Club. He brought in a striking instructor for the first time. He redesigned the grappling syllabus to incorporate what he called angular entry theory, a framework he developed from the principles of that Tuesday evening, applied through his own lens of wrestling and judo. He stopped teaching size advantage as an absolute. He started teaching it as one tool among many, a tool that created specific openings and closed off others, a tool that could be read and therefore anticipated by anyone trained to read it. His students from that revised curriculum, men who began training with him in 1971 and 1972, went on to form the nucleus of what became one of the most respected grappling programs in Northern California. Several of them became instructors themselves. One of them, a man named Marcus Webb who began studying with Hollis in 1972 at age 17, would eventually teach at a school in Sacramento where he trained multiple regional champions. Marcus Webb, in a 2003 interview for a martial arts documentary that never reached wide distribution, was asked about Roy Hollis's philosophy. He said, "Roy always said that the most important thing he ever learned was something he learned from the person who beat him by not beating him. He said, the fighter who goes looking for your size will find it. Train them to look for something else." Dennis Wong, who kept a pocket notebook, became a martial arts historian. He donated the notebook, 4 pages of observations, the underlined question, and a final note on the last page that simply reads, 135 pounds, 5 seconds. Chose not to. To the Bruce Lee Foundation archives in 2007. Roy Hollis retired from competition in 1973 at age 38, having added 3 more titles to his record and never having been submitted. He closed the East Bay Athletic Club in 1987 when the building was sold for development. He taught privately until 2001. He died in Oakland in 2009 at age 74. In his obituary in the Oakland Tribune, a single paragraph notice written by one of his longtime students, one line stands apart. He often said that he had learned more in 5 seconds from a slight man in gray slacks than in 14 years of competition, and that the greatest opponent he ever faced was the one who chose not to finish him. Now return to that gymnasium. Return to the moment before the silence breaks. A 411-pound champion, his balance gone, 137 pounds holding the geometry of the outcome, and then the deliberate step backward, the choice not to continue past the point of proof. That's not restraint. That's the philosophy made visible. That's not a smaller man winning. That's a different understanding of what winning means. That's not 5 seconds. That's a lifetime's thinking. Demonstrated once, changing 2 lives in opposite directions. One moment, one lesson, one legacy that is still being taught in rooms that neither man ever entered. And this, there was a fight Bruce Lee walked away from entirely that same year, not because he lost, and not because he won, but because of what he saw in the other man's eyes before it began. Nobody in that room spoke about it publicly for decades. The reason he walked away, and what he said to the man he refused to fight, that's a story for another time.